This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
Tonight on Unspun, we cut through the politics and get to the price tag. Right now, North Carolina is the only state in the country without a passed budget. You heard right, in the country. No balance sheet, no clear roadmap, and a lot of decisions being made on autopilot. So tonight we ask the question that too few people are talking about. What really happens when a state runs without a budget, and who pays the price for the delay? In today's America, welcome to the spin game. Believe me, I know, I'm Pat McCrory. When I was governor and mayor, I played the spin game. I was played by the spin game. But aren't we all done being spun? Let's take the spin out of the world we're in, here on Unspun. Good evening, I'm Pat McCrory and welcome to Unspun, the show that tells you what politicians are thinking but not saying. A budget stalemate has real consequences for taxpayers, state employees, local governments, and for a state that prides itself on fiscal discipline. Our guest tonight is Dale Folwell, former North Carolina State Treasurer and one of the state's most vocal advocates for transparency, balanced books, and long-term financial health. As Treasurer, he oversaw billions in state assets, managed pensions and debt, and was often the first to warn when political gridlock started to create real financial risk. Please welcome, via phone due to some technical difficulties, former State Treasurer Dale Folwell. Dale, it's great to have you on Unspun again.
Well, it's great to be with you on this show. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, and it looks like the budget process at the federal and the state level is as broken as our technology skills are this morning.
Well, let's talk about the budget impasse at the state level. We're the only state in North Carolina without a budget at this point in time. Based upon your experience as a House member and as treasurer, who do you think holds the leverage right now in this stalled negotiations?
Well, too often in our world these days, Governor, things don't matter to people until they matter to people. And obviously there's something that Senator Berger and Speaker of the House disagree on that's keeping the budget from being passed. And it's starting to have an impact on folks, especially when you correctly stated that we're the only state in the country that does not have a budget that's passed. The financial condition in North Carolina, nothing compares to that in terms of over the last 8 years, we retired over 80%, 60% of the state debt, and things are going well from a growth standpoint. But at some point, the rating agencies are going to start to notice the fact that we are the only state that doesn't have a budget that's passed.
Well, let's talk about that. You have a lot of experience with the rating agencies being treasurer. What is
the rating agencies? And for your viewers, simplify this: a rating agency to the state is the same thing as a credit score would be to you, or
good analysis.
A sanitation grade would be to a restaurant. It's a sign of quality, but in this environment where North Carolina is not issuing any new debt, we're actually paying off debt, is not as important as it always has been. But at the end of the day, there seems to be a lot of concern about what's going to happen, not just this year, but next year and the year after, in terms of the budget and the growth that's going on in the budget. And I think that's where the sticking point is in this particular instance.
Well, let's go real back to the rating agencies. We're a AAA bond-rated state, which helps us get lower interest bonds when we borrow money. Do you think that's at risk at this point in time?
I don't think it's a risk. Obviously, the rating agencies are aware of it, but you do not typically go out to get a rating unless you're actually issuing new debt. And the state of North Carolina, at the state level at least, is continuing to pay off debt. The people who are issuing debt, as your viewers know, are cities and counties who are issuing record amounts of debt for all kinds of things. So the rating agency thing is not such a big deal right now. But once again, you don't want the distinction of being the only state that does not have a budget. And as I was thinking about anticipating our time today, Governor, as I'm was wearing the lapel pin earlier, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the country. It's just remarkable. I think if my facts are correct, the United States of America has not had a balanced budget this century. So this is not just a state problem. I think it's a federal problem, obviously. But at the state level, the state does not have the ability to live beyond its means like the federal government does.
So what other impacts will this budget process not being decided have on,
I think,
for example, state employees and benefits and services?
There are some things in that, $30-some billion budget that was just there for 1 or 2 years. And, people who were expecting funding from the state of North Carolina for 1 or 2 years, they would like to see that become a recurring item, or like to see that, freshened up for another 2 years. So issues like that. And unfortunately, in this day and time where it reminds me back in the 60s, and Governor, you were living back then like I was, people were just screaming past each other. Nobody's really interested in the facts. And too often, even though the state legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, even though the state legislature is at a budget impasse, there are lots of things that get blamed on that, which may have nothing to do with it at all. And that's sort of the environment that we're in right now. People just screaming past each other, and facts and expertise don't really matter.
Well, let's talk about the politics of this. Again, you've been a member of the House. You work for my administration, as a great job as head of unemployment. You know that politics, this is between two Republican bodies, the House and the Senate. We've got an election year coming up where all of them are up for re-election, primaries in March. Explain the hardball politics when it's within the same party.
It comes back to something else, Governor, that I've always said, that people sometimes blame things on politics, but it's just people. It's the people, regardless of what political party they're a member of, that put us in this situation. And I think that the Republican Party has been and facing a very big inflection point in terms of counterfeit conservatism. And this is what I mean is that the root word of conservative is to conserve. It just means to save. I've always associated with saving lives and minds, M-I-N-D-S, and money.
Well, so wait a minute.
But it could be applied to
Dale,
everything. And
let me interrupt you real quick.
People want, no matter what their opinion is about the political parties, and no matter what level of government they think the state of North Carolina should have, what they want is a state government that works for them.
Dale, real quick, some would argue, I've heard this argument, well, if they don't pass a budget, they're spending what the last year's budget was, therefore we're going to conserve money. But that comes with ramifications. What do you think?
Well, that's exactly right, but that's kind of mathematically, very quickly, it creates a problem because of the growth in our state and the fact that we're not the same state that we were 2 years ago in terms of the number of people that are here that need services. So everybody has their fingers crossed that this will be dealt with, but there doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel from what I can see that these issues are going to be dealt with before the primary.
So that's so you don't think it'll be solved with before March?
I've seen no indication that's going to be solved before March. And with North Carolina having the highest health care cost in the United States, on top of being the only state that doesn't have a budget this past, a lot of these things that are going to have big budgetary impacts, a lot of these problems continue to get worse, and they'll be getting worse this month, next month, and until these problems are actually resolved. So
in Raleigh, or at least throughout the rest of the state, no one's hearing about it. We're bringing it up here on Unspun because we want to let viewers know we have no state budget. Why is no one talking about it? Or we hear very little about it at this point in time?
Well, no one's talking about it because, as I said in the beginning of my interview, things don't matter to people until it matters to them. And they're not seeing the real impacts of these budgetary impasses like they did when our federal government was shut down. But just want to remind your viewers that our federal government, their federal government has not had a budget probably this century, and not had a balanced budget since the last century. And at the end of the day, you cannot continue to spend money that you don't have.
Well, one thing that you've always said as treasurer, and you said as a member of my administration, you talked about unfunded liabilities. So we've always bragged, every governor's always bragged we have a balanced budget, but in fact, you remind all of us, you reminded me many times as governor, but we have a lot of unfunded liabilities, especially in the area of our health care for state employees and the pension program, and the billions of dollars.
Well, you're exactly right, and we had an unfunded liability that you helped me and our state employees solve, and taxpayers, with the $2.5 billion of unemployment debt, which now is turned into a multi-billion-dollar surplus. And so that's just an example. When you actually are clear-minded and have things in the right sequence, you can actually solve these problems. But our unfunded health care and pension liability is larger than the state budget. I'll say that again. The unfunded pension and health care liability just for the state of North Carolina.
And most people have no idea.
The state budget. So this continues to be a serious problem.
You're talking about 30, 40, 50, even more billion dollars.
That's exactly right. And, at the end of the day, some legislators don't even think that this is really a unfunded liability, but I can tell you the rating agencies think it's an unfunded liability. The generally accepted accounting principles think it's an unfunded liability. And when I first started as a state treasurer, our unfunded liability per capita was right below the state of Illinois, the same Illinois that your viewers hear about all the time.
And if the economy takes a downturn, Dale.
When you think about pointing fingers, the fingers for this liability should be pointed at Republicans and Democrats who have not dealt with this for decades.
So if you were in charge right now, if you were in the governor's office, what would you be saying and what would you be doing right now? We have a Democratic governor, Republican legislature. Regardless of party, what would you be saying to the public and what would you be saying to the legislature that maybe is not being said right now?
What I'd be saying is what Popeye said when you and I were growing up, that we can't stand it because we can't stand it no more. You cannot continue to have most of a person's income going toward a product called health care where they do not know the value and the cost of it even after they've consumed it. They're not really consuming it, it's consuming them. So there's several really simple things that could be accomplished. Number one is to repeal the certificate of need law of the state. And the short for that is CON, which it is a con on the people of North Carolina.
All right, we could take all day to
abide by
real quick,
Trump
Dale,
and President Biden's
hold on
previous executive orders to tell people what things cost in health care. And lastly, stop breaking people's kneecaps for not paying their bills for a product no one told them what it would cost.
Amen to that. And certificates of participation, most people don't realize what that is. You've got about 30 seconds to describe what that means.
Well, it's a market restriction that keeps the supply of a product down, which keeps the price up.
And this is regarding health care.
Correct.
And emergency surgical rooms, which increase the cost of our health care.
All the above. I am optimistic that the president has taken the lead on something that I started 5 years ago about healthcare cost. And as you know, I've said it 4 years ago, why should people in North Carolina pay $1,300 for the Wegovy weight loss drugs when people in Europe pay $100 for it? And, the president has taken the lead on that particular issue and lowering costs. So there are ways to actually fix these problems, which is all your viewers really want at the end of the day.
Well, health care is about 25%, maybe more of our budget and our economy at this point in time. So we better do something. In 30 seconds, Dale, the long-term implications of nothing being done.
Well, the long-term implications is that back in the day, people had the fear of going to the doctor because there weren't enough doctors. And now people have a fear of the health care bill. So the fear of seeking health care in this state is making people sicker, in my opinion, and making the problem even worse. So, as I said earlier,
that's good. Dale,
these problems are solvable, but what it takes is people to sit down in a room who operate above the dignity of their offices, above, not below.
Dale,
and are willing to challenge assumptions. And if you do those two things,
Dale, we got to wrap
you
this
can
up.
solve the problem.
Dale, I appreciate you. You're the first guy to ever quote Popeye on Unspun, and I really appreciate you coming on and telling the truth as you see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right, we got time for the top 5 budget games politicians play. Number five, leadership earmarks. Leadership earmarks. This is where the leaders of the House and Senate kind of play this game. Well, I'll make a deal if my district gets a little extra road money. That's called an earmark. It's called quid pro quo. Number 4, balanced budget spin. This is where the governor and state legislators always brag about, we have a balanced budget. Well, the fact of the matter is they don't count billions of dollars in unfunded liabilities. Number 3, policy sneak-ins. This is another deal maker where a state legislator who might be the swing vote on a budget will go, well, I'll vote for this budget, but you've got to put a little policy in which will change, say, for example, how we get to vote or how political districts are drawn. Nothing to do with the budget, but they want to throw a little policy in to have more influence. By the way, you're not supposed to do it, but they do it anyway. And number 2, the old tax label games. This is where both Republicans and Democrats play this game where during the budget they go, we need to give a tax break to the middle class, but they never define the middle class. Or they need to say, often they go, we need to tax the rich more, but they never define who is the rich. And number 1, the fact of the matter is most legislators don't read the budget. It's that thick. They're usually given about 24 hours. They're winging it. Time now for One-on-One. Joining me is Anna Bevan Gravely. You might have seen her on NC Spin, and she is also the founder of Restless Politico and co-host of the YouTube podcast, Sat Chats, a podcast for Bitcoin beginners. Welcome, Anna. This is our first person on our One-on-One from a podcast.
I'm so happy to be here first.
It's an honor to have you, coming all the way from Raleigh.
Yes, sir. Happy to be here. So I want to dive in with some questions from the perspective of a voter.
Okay.
So voters are in the position to judge leaders based on their results, not their rhetoric. It's a really unique position that we get to take part in through the electoral process. And so over the next few months, what concrete actions should North Carolinians watch for to know whether or not this budget stalemate is about policy or about preserving power?
I think they got to watch for, first of all, how much longer is it going to take? Will they have a budget in which the governor also agrees with and doesn't veto? And also, how many deals will be made to make the budget? And will the deals include maybe some side policy deals that they sneak into the budget, like I mentioned on my top 5? Mm-hmm. Or will they be certain things like giving away road money, which goes against the policy that I pass as governor, or other type of money being passed out across the state to get a deal made? That will make the difference. Are they doing a budget for the right reasons, or is it pure politics?
So what are some telltale signs that they're doing it for the right reasons? Because we're getting closer and closer to Election Day. We are now in 2026, so the election's basically tomorrow. If you were to ask anybody that's going to get mail in their mailbox. What are some things that you can look for as a voter who wants to sort of cut through the chatter?
Yeah, I think you just answered your own question, and that is, if you start getting things in the mailbox about attacking the other side about the budget It was all about the next election, not about the next generation. And you know how they get these, you get these mail-outs, both the Republicans and Democrats do. They send out these threefold bailouts that cost a lot of money, and a lot of people are making money sending out those mail-outs. If it's all about attacking the other person on the budget, it was probably all to set up anyway for the next election. And it could be a primary election too.
We are looking forward to a primary election. There's one primary election in particular that we're looking forward to, and you've mentioned it before in your show. And so the primary between President Pro Tem Phil Berger and Sheriff Sam Page, what is that, what kind of impact is that having on the budget, do you think?
I don't know if it's having an impact on the budget as much as having an impact on the future power of North Carolina. As you know, Phil Berger, the head of the Senate, has been holding power for 14 to 15 years now. I mean, that's a long time to hold on to power. And usually what happens when people try to hold on to power too long, they lose track of what the people back home in their own district are thinking in Rockingham County and parts of Guilford County for Phil Berger. And all of a sudden, the sheriff there went, enough of it. That's enough. We only see you in Raleigh. You never come back home because you're more interested in power. This has happened in D.C. and it's happened in Raleigh before, where if you overstay your welcome, there's pushback from the people back home. And maybe that is a reason why Phil Berger is not passing the budget right now, is holding on to it. Maybe he's trying to do one big announcement, or maybe he doesn't want to get stuck with something that could be used against him in the primary coming up in March.
So, in previous budget conversations, which North Carolina has had a very interesting relationship with our budget ever since 2019, which coincides with how long Republicans have been in power. The longer they've been in power and in control, it's taken them longer and longer and longer to pass a budget. Is there a connection there to you, or is that just me?
No, it's not. It's not just you. I guarantee you. It happened when I was governor, and we had two Republican leaders in the House and Senate, controlled totally, super majority. They were having turf power fights between the Speaker of the House and the head of the Senate, Phil Berger. And it was all about power. It was all about power. And they couldn't come to a conclusion, but at that time, because we had a Republican governor, it was me, I got him in a room, and their other legislative leaders locked the door, brought bologna sandwiches, and said, we're not leaving this room until there's a budget and until we have the tax relief that we all promised. It was really power over the tax bill at the time, who gets the tax cuts and who doesn't. And it was a power struggle among some lobbyists. Some lobbyists have more power in the Senate, and other lobbyists and other interests have more power in the House. And they were coming under conflict. You especially see that in healthcare with the hospital power and the hospital lobbyists. For-profit versus nonprofit.
Absolutely. And I am thankful that you went for the bologna. I think that's probably what solved it. If it was a turkey or ham situation, there would have been too many choices on the table.
It was on the hoagie rolls, and we finally did get a deal, but I'll tell you, it took a long time. But now, with a Democratic governor, there's no incentive for the House and Senate to figure out this power struggle. In fact, most people thought the power struggle was between me and the House and Senate. No, it was all between the House and Senate, people of the same party. This is what happens when you have one party dominating one branch. They tend to fight over power more than policy. It happens to both the Democrats, happened to Democrats in the 80s and 90s, and now it's happened to the Republicans.
So do you think that the dynamic that exists between former Speaker Tim Moore and President Pro Tem Phil Berger was different and more helpful toward reaching a conclusion than the dynamic between Speaker Dustin Hall and Senator Phil Berger?
Absolutely. One thing, Dustin Hall is more of a detail guy. He has an accounting background. He's reading the budget. He's not willing to make deals or let things be slid in. That's my understanding of what's happening in Raleigh right now. The power struggles now is different with the person who's on the House side looking at the details. We're out of time, but man, we got to have you back. We got to have you back.
Yes.
This podcast questioning is very, very strong.
Yes.
Thanks again.
Thank you
for being on One on One. Before a single dollar is spent in the state budget, a much bigger fight takes place behind closed doors. North Carolina has a long history of the governor presenting a budget to an always powerful legislature. And regardless of the party, the legislature then largely ignores those recommendations. Legislators start from scratch, and that's when the real politics begin, behind closed doors. The budget chairpersons of the House and Senate, along with their bosses, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, take center stage. And the obvious question is, who's really pulling the strings? Well, powerful lobbyists, committee chairs, state employee unions, education leaders, industry groups, even the governor with the veto pen, and plenty of others. This is where hardball politics and negotiations truly start. So where's the real battle? Well, to my surprise, when I was governor, and it's still true today, the fight isn't really partisan. It's primarily about power, specifically power between the House and Senate leadership. Each side is trying to prove to their members that they're lobbyists and even the governor, that they hold the power card in North Carolina. Why? Because power attracts donations. Donations create more power. That power strengthens leaders with their members, the same members who vote for them as leaders. And with that money, leaders help fund those members' re-election campaigns. It's a vicious cycle. And in the long run, it's not good for the state, but it is good for those who benefit from the existing power structure, at least for a while. Because eventually in politics, those in power overplay their hand. New leadership takes over, and as the saying goes, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And just like that, the cycle starts again. Well, that's the truth as I see it. Good night, folks.
A production of PBS Charlotte.